The passengers on Flight 782 were settling in, sunlight pouring through the wide windows as the plane prepared for takeoff. Everything seemed calm until Karen entered, wearing oversized sunglasses, a designer scarf, and an attitude that could cut steel. She strutted down the aisle like she owned the airline, but when she saw a young trans woman sitting gracefully in first class, her smile vanished. Karen froze, then scowled, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Excuse me," she barked at the flight attendant. "There must be some mistake. That man," she jabbed a manicured finger toward the passenger, "shouldn't be in first class. Move him to the back." The cabin went silent. The trans woman, calm and poised, simply looked out the window, her long hair glowing in the daylight. The attendant tried to diffuse the tension, but Karen grew louder, demanding real women should have priority seating. Phones began to record. Some passengers muttered in disbelief. Others whispered for Karen to stop, but she wouldn't. What Karen didn't know, what would soon turn her smugness into sheer horror, was that the woman she was insulting wasn't just any passenger. She was Ava Turner, daughter of Rebecca Turner, the CEO of Skylux Airlines. And Rebecca happened to be boarding the same flight that as the doors closed and the engines roared to life. Karen had no idea her arrogance was about to spark one of the most talked about moments in airline history. A lesson in respect, identity, and the power of standing up for what's right, all under the bright morning sun at 30,000 feet. Asterisk. The morning sun was bright over the bustling Skylux terminal, its glass walls glowing gold as travelers hurried in every direction. Flight 782 to Los Angeles was nearly ready for boarding. Ground staff called out final instructions, the hum of voices and rolling suitcases echoing through the hall. Amid the controlled chaos, a tall, confident woman walked toward the gate, Karen Wilcox, perfectly dressed and ready to make sure everyone knew she was someone important. Karen lived for moments like this, the ones where she could flash her gold Skylux card, tilt her head, and watch people scramble to serve her. She'd built her entire identity on appearances, a polished look, a sharp tone, and a constant need to prove her superiority. Her sunglasses gleamed under the sunlight streaming through the terminal, and her heels clicked like a metronome announcing her arrival. When the gate agent scanned her ticket, Karen smiled with practiced charm. "First class, as usual," she said proudly. The agent returned a polite smile, wishing her a pleasant flight, but Karen was already glancing around the boarding area, subtly judging the people who would soon share her cabin. The boarding call echoed through the speakers. "We now invite our first-class passengers to board Flight 782 for Los Angeles." Karen didn't wait for anyone. She swept past the line, lifting her chin as though she were royalty. The flight attendants greeted her warmly, their smiles professional and unshaken. They'd seen plenty of Karens before. As Karen reached her seat right by the window, she noticed something that made her pause. Sitting just across the aisle was a young woman with long, soft brown hair, wearing a light blue blouse and reading a travel magazine. There was something delicate yet confident about her presence. Her posture was graceful, her voice calm as she thanked the flight attendant for a glass of water. But as Karen looked closer, something clicked in her mind, a cruel, judgmental instinct that had always come too easily to her. Her lips tightened. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered under her breath. The young woman was trans. It wasn't anything she said or did. It was simply how Karen's eyes sought flaws, differences, things that didn't fit into her narrow box of what she called normal. She stared unfiltered and unapologetic, until the young woman noticed and smiled politely, a simple, human gesture of kindness. But Karen's expression didn't soften. Instead, she gave a small, dismissive laugh, as though the very idea of sharing space with her was absurd. When the rest of the passengers began finding their seats, Karen leaned toward the nearest flight attendant, her voice sharp but quiet enough to seem discreet, though she clearly wanted to be overheard. "Excuse me," she said, tilting her head with fake politeness. "There must be some mistake. That person," she nodded toward the young woman, "isn't supposed to be in first class." The attendant blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Miss Turner is in the correct seat." "Is there a problem?" Karen scoffed. "Problem? Well, yes, I'd say so. I paid for a premium experience. I didn't expect to." She hesitated, lowering her voice just enough for dramatic effect. "Sit next to someone who clearly doesn't belong here." Her tone was laced with superiority and disgust. A few nearby passengers looked up, confused, sensing the rising tension. The young woman, Ava Turner, closed her magazine slowly and turned to face Karen. Her expression was calm, her eyes gentle, but steady. "I believe I belong here," Ava said softly. "Just like you," Karen smirked. "Oh, sweetie, let's not make this complicated. I'm sure the airline can move you somewhere more comfortable." The flight attendant's face tightened. "Ma'am, Miss Turner has every right to this seat. Please lower your voice." But Karen's ego was like a flame once sparked. It only grew. "Lower my voice," she repeated loudly, enough for half the cabin to hear. "Maybe you should lower your standards. I can't believe this airline." Would phones came out. A few passengers began recording quietly. Others shifted uncomfortably, hoping the situation would end before takeoff. But Karen was too wrapped in her own outrage to notice the camera lenses. catching every cruel word she spoke. Ava didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue or insult. She simply turned back to the window, letting the morning light spill across her face. Her calmness infuriated Karen even more. She wanted a reaction, a confrontation, something to prove she was right. Instead, she got silence, grace, and strength. The flight attendant took a steady breath. "Ma'am, please take your seat. We're about to depart." Karen folded her arms, muttering under her breath. Unbelievable. This world's lost all standards. But the universe, it seemed, had its own timing. Just as the last passengers were boarding, a small commotion stirred near the entrance of the plane. Another woman entered, elegant, composed, dressed in a crisp navy business suit. The entire cabin crew straightened instantly. Her presence carried authority. Her name tag read Rebecca Turner. Karen noticed immediately. Finally, she said to herself, someone professional. She assumed Rebecca was some senior airline executive and prepared to report what she called a service issue. Rebecca walked down the aisle, exchanging polite nods with the crew, until her eyes landed on Ava. A soft smile crossed her face. "There you are," she said warmly. "I thought you might board early." Karen's smirk faltered. "You know her?" she asked, confused. Rebecca turned her gaze on Karen, calm, piercing, commanding. "Yes," she said. "She's my daughter." The words hung in the air like thunder. Passengers turned their heads. The recording phones caught every second. Karen's confidence cracked instantly. Rebecca's voice remained firm but controlled. "Is there a reason you were speaking to her that way?" Karen stammered. I didn't mean anything. You were just disrespecting a passenger." Rebecca interrupted. "A paying customer. My daughter, and from what I hear, making a scene in first class." The plane was silent. Even the engines seemed to pause. Karen's face burned red as realization hit her. The woman she had insulted wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of the airline's CEO. Rebecca leaned closer, her voice calm but unshakably strong. "You should be ashamed. My daughter deserves respect not because of who I am, but because she's a human being. Something you seem to have forgotten." The entire cabin watched. Karen tried to speak, but only managed a trembling whisper. "I didn't know." "Now you do," Rebecca replied. The flight attendant quietly guided Karen back to her seat. Ava looked at her mother with a small, grateful smile, her eyes bright in the morning sunlight. Rebecca gave her a reassuring nod before moving to her own seat nearby. As the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi down the runway, Karen stared out the window, her reflection pale against the bright blue sky. Around her, whispers spread quietly. The same passengers who'd watched in silence before were now murmuring about what they'd just witnessed, an unforgettable confrontation in broad daylight. Ava, meanwhile, turned her face toward the sunlight, calm once again. She didn't need revenge, or even vindication. The truth in her mother's presence had spoken louder than anything Karen could have said. The plane lifted off into the sky, sunlight washing over the clouds. For everyone on board, it was just another flight. But for Karen, it was the beginning of a very public lesson, one that the world would soon see for itself. By the time Flight 782 soared above the clouds, the tension in first class was thick enough to cut with a knife. The morning sunlight streamed in through the oval windows, filling the cabin with golden warmth. Yet Karen Wilcox felt nothing but cold shame crawling up her spine. She sat stiffly in her seat, trying to look composed, but her cheeks burned with embarrassment. Every time she glanced up, she could feel the eyes of other passengers on her. Some looked at her with disgust, others with pity, and a few with poorly concealed amusement. The once proud woman who strutted onto the plane like she owned it now sat silent and small, clutching her designer purse in her lap. She told herself that things would blow over, that people would forget as soon as the flight landed. After all, it wasn't like anyone important had really seen what happened. Or so she thought. 2 rows behind her, a college student named Mia scrolled through her phone, replaying the video she had secretly recorded during the confrontation. It captured everything. Karen's sharp words, her sneering tone, Ava's quiet grace, and finally, the moment Rebecca Turner revealed herself as the airline CEO and defended her daughter. The reactions in the background, gasps, murmurs, the stunned silence told the story better than any caption could. "Are you seriously posting that?" whispered her friend next to her. Mia grinned. "Oh, this isn't just a post, this is karma in real time." Within minutes, the video hit social media, first on TikTok, then on Instagram, and then across every major platform. The title read, "Karen demands trans woman be removed from first class, then finds out who she really is." The clip spread like wildfire, shared thousands of times before the plane even touched down. Back in first class, Ava sat quietly by the window, unaware that she had just become the center of a viral storm. She sipped her orange juice, the sunlight glinting off the rim of her glass. Beside her, the flight attendant smiled nervously, still shaken by the earlier scene but comforted by Ava's calmness. Ava could feel Karen's eyes on her from time to time, the stares of regret and humiliation, but she didn't respond. She wasn't angry anymore. There was a time when she might have cried after such an encounter, when every cruel word felt like a wound. But today, she simply felt sad for the woman sitting across the aisle, trapped in her own bitterness. "Would you like anything else, Miss Turner?" the flight attendant asked softly. No thank you, Ava replied. I'm fine. Meanwhile, Rebecca Turner sat a few rows behind, reviewing reports on her tablet, but her attention kept drifting toward her daughter. She had seen Ava face judgment before, people who whispered, stared, or misgendered her, but she'd also seen how Ava grew stronger with every challenge, choosing grace where others might choose anger. Rebecca felt proud, but a part of her heart ached that Ava still had to deal with ignorance, even in first class, even on her own airline. Halfway through the flight, Karen could no longer stand the silence. She turned slightly in her seat, leaning toward Ava. Listen, she whispered, voice trembling. I just want to say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. Ava turned her gaze toward her, her expression unreadable. You didn't offend me, she said softly. You embarrassed yourself. Karen blinked, stunned by the honesty. Ava's tone wasn't cruel or mocking. It was calm, matter-of-fact, almost compassionate. People show who they are in how they treat others, Ava added, then turned back to her magazine. The rest of the flight was quiet. The sunlight shifted across the cabin, bright and constant, as though nature itself refused to dim the moment with shadow. Karen stared out at the endless sky, feeling smaller and smaller the longer she sat. She had never been talked to that way, not by a stranger, and certainly not by someone she had judged as less than. When the plane finally began its descent into Los Angeles, the passengers fastened their seatbelts. The captain's voice came over the intercom, cheerful and calm. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. On behalf of Skylux Airlines, thank you for flying with us. Karen exhaled in relief. She couldn't wait to get off that plane, to leave this humiliation behind her. She didn't know what awaited her outside that cabin, the hundreds of thousands of people who had already seen her face online. As the plane touched down and taxied toward the gate, phones began lighting up with notifications. Passengers checked messages, smiled, gasped. A murmur began spreading down the aisle. Oh my God, that video's viral already, someone whispered. It's got 500,000 views. Karen froze. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. No, it can't be. By the time passengers were allowed to stand and collect their belongings, whispers had turned into open stares. A teenage boy in economy section passed by and murmured, "That's her, the lady from the video." Karen's stomach dropped. She clutched her purse tighter, avoiding eye contact, but the damage was done. When she finally stepped into the bright terminal, flashes from phone cameras followed her. The golden daylight that once made her feel glamorous now felt like a spotlight she couldn't escape. Ava walked out moments later with her mother, surrounded by murmurs of admiration. Strangers came up to her quietly, thanking her for handling the situation with such grace. One woman said, "You showed real strength up there." Ava smiled shyly, not fully understanding how far the story had already spread. Rebecca placed a protective arm around her daughter's shoulder. "Ignore the noise," she said gently. "You were yourself. That's what matters." But even Rebecca couldn't ignore the growing buzz. Her assistant called her moments later, voice urgent. "Ma'am, the video from Flight 782 is trending everywhere. News outlets are already reaching out for statements." Rebecca sighed, glancing at her daughter. "Of course they are," she muttered. Meanwhile, Karen's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages flooded in from friends, co-workers, and even her boss. Some were sympathetic, others furious. The headlines were merciless, entitled, "Passenger Confronts Trans Woman on Flight Learns a Brutal Lesson." Karen tried to deny it, tried to tell herself it would fade in a day, but she knew deep down that nothing on the internet ever truly disappeared. Outside the airport, cameras flashed as reporters gathered near the arrivals gate. Someone shouted, "Miss Turner, how did it feel when the passenger insulted you?" Ava blinked, overwhelmed. Rebecca stepped in quickly, guiding her past the chaos. "No comments," she said firmly. That night, while the world replayed the video over and over, two very different realities unfolded. Ava sat at home with her mother, sipping tea, trying to process everything. "I didn't want this," she said quietly. "I just wanted to fly to Los Angeles." Rebecca smiled softly. "Sometimes, change happens when we don't plan it. Maybe this will make people think before they speak." Across town, Karen sat alone in her apartment, blinds closed, scrolling through a flood of hate comments. Her face was everywhere in memes, headlines, and angry posts calling for her to be banned from flying. Tears welled up in her eyes as the truth finally sank in. One moment of arrogance had destroyed the image she spent her life building. In the brightness of the next morning, the world would see her not as the woman she pretended to be, but as the symbol of what happens when cruelty meets consequence under the light of day. The morning after Flight 782 landed, the city of Los Angeles buzzed with sunlight, noise, and breaking news. Screens across coffee shops, airports, and living rooms lit up with the same headline: "Passenger Confronts Trans Woman in First Class, Airline CEO Steps In." Clips of the confrontation were everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, even national morning shows. The world couldn't look away. On one side was Karen Wilcox, the woman whose arrogance had gone viral. On the other, Ava Turner, whose quiet grace had turned her into an overnight symbol of dignity and courage. In a downtown cafe, two baristas watched the replay on a phone propped against the espresso machine. Damn, one of them said, shaking her head. That poor girl. She handled that way better than I would have. The other barista nodded. Yeah, and that Karen lady, she's toast. Everyone's dragging her online. Outside, newspapers lined with headlines fluttered in the warm wind. Commentators were already debating it on talk shows. Social media was split between outrage, admiration, and disbelief. Hashtags like hashtag Ava Turner, hashtag Flight 782, and hashtag Skylux Scandal trended worldwide. For many, it wasn't just a viral video. It had become a cultural flashpoint. Meanwhile, Ava sat in her mother's sunny kitchen, still trying to understand how her life had changed overnight. The morning light streamed through the window, falling over her cup of tea. She hadn't slept much. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from friends, journalists, and strangers offering support. "Mom," Ava said quietly, setting her phone down, "I didn't ask for any of this." Rebecca looked up from her laptop. She had been fielding calls from Skylux's public relations team since sunrise. "I know, sweetheart, none of this is your fault," she said gently, "but the world saw what happened and they saw how you handled it. That matters." Ava frowned. "It shouldn't be a big deal to just exist, to sit in a seat I paid for." Rebecca reached over, placing a comforting hand on her daughter's. "You're right, but sometimes it takes a moment like this for people to realize how wrong discrimination still is. You didn't cause this story, Ava, you changed it." Outside, reporters camped on the sidewalk waiting for a statement. Drones buzzed above the manicured hedges, and photographers shouted questions from beyond the gate. Rebecca's security team stood watch, keeping the chaos at bay. Meanwhile, in a very different part of the city, Karen Wilcox sat alone in her dim apartment, blinds drawn, her phone lighting up every few seconds. Her name was trending for all the wrong reasons. News anchors dissected her every word. Strangers had found her social media accounts, flooding them with comments. "Disgusting behavior. You deserve to lose your job." Imagine being that hateful. Karen's eyes were red and puffy from crying. She had never been this exposed before, not even close. She used to be admired at her company for her confidence and her ability to speak her mind. Now, she was suspended indefinitely. Her boss had called earlier that morning. "Karen, until this situation is resolved, we're asking you not to come into the office," he'd said in a tone that was more cold than sympathetic. "Resolved," she'd repeated bitterly. "It's a witch hunt." But deep down, she knew it wasn't. She had crossed a line. Her email inbox overflowed with messages, some from people mocking her, others from talk shows inviting her to tell her side. But what side was there to tell? Everyone had seen the footage. Every sneer, every word dripping with entitlement. She replayed it in her mind, wincing at her own tone. It wasn't just bad, it was cruel. Karen turned on the TV, only to see her own face on the screen. A news anchor narrated Skylux CEO Rebecca Turner confirmed that the woman targeted in the viral flight video was her daughter, Ava Turner. The airline has since issued a statement reaffirming its commitment to inclusivity and respect for all passengers. The camera cut to a clip of Rebecca at a press conference. Calm and professional as always. "No one should be made to feel unwelcome because of who they are," Rebecca said. "Skylux stands by its passengers and by my daughter." Karen muted the TV, burying her face in her hands. She couldn't escape herself. Back at the Turner household, Ava hesitated before checking her social media again. Her notifications were endless. Thousands of supportive comments, drawings, videos, and messages from strangers thanking her for her composure. But buried among them were cruel messages too, from people who mocked her identity or accused her of seeking attention. "People can be kind," she whispered, scrolling through the support. "But they can be cruel too." Rebecca nodded solemnly. "That's why your strength matters. You didn't fight with hate, you showed grace. That's what people remember." Ava sighed. "I don't want to be some kind of symbol, Mom. I just wanted a quiet flight." "I know," Rebecca said softly, "but life had other plans." Across the internet, news outlets ran interviews with passengers who had witnessed the incident. Mia, the student who filmed the video, appeared on a live stream recounting what happened. "She never raised her voice," Mia said. "That's what stuck with me. Even when that woman was yelling at her, Ava stayed calm. I've never seen someone so composed." Ava's name became a rallying cry for respect and empathy. Advocacy groups reached out, asking her to speak at events. Rebecca's PR team urged her to consider doing an interview, but Ava hesitated. "I'm not ready for cameras," she told her mom. "I don't want to relive that moment again and again." Rebecca understood. She herself had been fielding criticism from shareholders who worried about the optics of the story, though most supported her publicly. Still, she stood firm. "I'd rather lose a few investors than silence the truth," she told them. By afternoon, the story had reached international outlets. Late-night hosts made jokes about first-class karma. Talk shows praised Ava's composure and criticized Karen's behavior as a perfect example of modern prejudice. But not everyone mocked Karen. Some commentators urged compassion, saying public humiliation wouldn't fix ignorance. "We can't shame people into kindness." One news host said, "But we can show them a better way." That night, the city lights glittered outside Karen's window as she sat at her dining table, staring at a half-written apology statement. She drafted it 3 times, deleting it each time. Every word felt hollow. She didn't even know if she meant it or if she was just desperate to make the nightmare stop. Finally, she whispered to herself, "I was wrong." Saying it out loud felt heavy, like swallowing glass. Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt truly small, not because people hated her, but because she saw herself clearly. Meanwhile, Ava stood on her balcony, the city below glowing under a blanket of twilight. Her mother joined her, handing her a blanket. "It's strange," Ava said softly. "Yesterday, I was invisible. Today, everyone knows my name." Rebecca smiled faintly. "People will forget the noise, Ava, but they'll remember your kindness. That's what light does. It stays, even after the storm." Down below, cameras flashed in the distance, journalists still waiting for a comment. But Ava didn't care. She wasn't just the girl from the plane anymore. She was proof that dignity could outshine cruelty even in the brightest daylight. And somewhere across town, Karen finally hit post on her apology, praying it wasn't too late to start being human again. The next morning dawned bright and warm, sunlight spilling across Los Angeles like a promise of renewal. But for Karen Wilcox, the day began with dread. She hadn't slept properly in 2 nights. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment replaying in her head, her own voice, sharp and cruel, echoing through the first-class cabin. Now, her phone buzzed relentlessly on the kitchen table, filled with messages she didn't want to read. Her public apology post, the one she had hesitated over for hours the night before, was finally live. It read, "I want to sincerely apologize for my behavior on Flight 782. My words were ignorant, disrespectful, and hurtful. I take full responsibility for the pain I caused, especially to Miss Ava Turner and her family. I am deeply ashamed and committed to learning from this." For a few minutes, Karen thought she'd feel better after posting it, but as she refreshed her feed and saw the reactions, her stomach tightened. Some people accepted it, some mocked it, and others accused her of only apologizing because she'd been caught. Too little, too late. You were sorry for getting exposed, not for what you said. Try empathy next time. It's free. She shut her phone off and stared out the window. The sunlight that filled her living room felt like an accusation, too bright for her guilt. Meanwhile, across town, Ava and her mother sat at a conference table inside Skylux's headquarters. The entire top floor gleamed with daylight reflecting off polished glass walls. The PR team was in a frenzy. The story had now reached international news. Every major outlet wanted an interview, and every journalist wanted Ava's comment on Karen's apology. Rebecca rubbed her temples, exhausted. "We can't avoid the press forever," said one of her advisors. "The public wants to hear from Ava. It could be a good opportunity to show strength and compassion." Ava looked uncertain. "I don't want to make it about revenge," she said softly. "I don't want people to think I'm trying to humiliate her. That's not who I am." Her mother nodded approvingly. "Then say that," she said gently. "You don't have to attack her, just tell your truth." After some thought, Ava agreed to one interview. She wanted to speak not for the attention, but for everyone who'd ever been made to feel lesser. Let them see that kindness doesn't mean weakness, she told her mother. Later that afternoon, Ava sat in a softly lit studio, sunlight pouring through the high windows. The host of a major morning show, a woman named Clara Lee, smiled warmly at her. The cameras rolled, and millions of people tuned in. "Ava, you've become a symbol of grace in the face of hate," Clara began. "How do you feel about everything that's happened since that flight?" Ava took a slow breath before answering. "Overwhelmed," she admitted, "but mostly sad. Sad that it took an incident like this for people to realize how deep discrimination still runs. I don't want to be famous for being disrespected. I just want to live like anyone else." Clara nodded. "And have you seen Karen Wilcox's apology?" Ava hesitated. "I have," she said softly. "I don't know if she means it, but I hope she does. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is whether we change after them." The simplicity of her words struck a chord. By the time the interview ended, social media was flooded again, not with outrage this time, but admiration. People called Ava's response classy, forgiving, powerful without being vengeful. Even those who had once mocked her now seemed humbled by her strength. Rebecca watched the broadcast from her office, pride shining in her eyes. For all her power as CEO, she knew her daughter's quiet integrity carried more influence than any corporate statement ever could. But not everyone was celebrating. Karen sat alone on her couch, watching Ava's interview live. Every word pierced her heart. Ava wasn't angry, she was calm, kind, and heartbreakingly human. That hurt the most. It would have been easier if Ava had yelled or demanded punishment, but her compassion left Karen nowhere to hide from her own guilt. When the interview ended, Karen stared at the darkened screen. For the first time in years, she whispered a prayer. "Please," she murmured, "let her know I'm truly sorry." The following day, Karen made a decision she never thought she would. She requested a private meeting with Rebecca Turner, not for publicity, not for forgiveness from the world, but to look the woman in the eye and apologize. She knew there was a good chance Rebecca wouldn't even see her. Still, she tried, taught to her surprise. Rebecca agreed. That afternoon, under the full glow of the California sun, Karen arrived at Skylux headquarters. She looked nothing like the woman from the viral video. Her makeup was minimal, her expression sincere, her usual confidence replaced by quiet humility. Security escorted her to Rebecca's office, where sunlight poured through tall glass panels overlooking the city skyline. Rebecca stood when she entered, her expression firm but not cold. "Ms. Wilcox," she greeted. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." Karen swallowed hard. "I almost didn't," she admitted, "but I needed to." Rebecca gestured for her to sit. The silence that followed was heavy. Karen clasped her hands together, staring down at the floor. "I wanted to say this face to face," she began, voice trembling. "What I said on that flight. It was cruel. I was cruel. I grew up thinking people like me were better, more deserving. And it's taken this for me to realize how wrong I was. I'm sorry to you, to your daughter, to everyone I hurt." Rebecca studied her carefully. She had seen countless apologies in her life, many empty, many rehearsed. But this one felt different. Karen's eyes glistened with genuine shame. "Do you know why I let you come here today?" Rebecca asked. Karen shook her head. "Because I believe people can change," Rebecca said softly. "But change isn't words, it's action. Ava doesn't need your apology to heal. But maybe, by owning what you did and doing better from now on, you can help others think twice before acting like you did." Karen nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I will," she whispered. "I swear I will." Then, unexpectedly, Rebecca smiled faintly. "You know, Ava doesn't hate you," she said. "She actually hoped you'd learn from this. That's who she is." Karen blinked, overwhelmed. "She's remarkable," she said softly. "I wish I'd seen that before instead of my own prejudice." Rebecca stood, offering her hand. Karen rose slowly and shook it, her eyes glistening in the daylight. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking as Karen left the building. The afternoon sun felt different, not accusing this time but cleansing. She knew she couldn't undo what she'd done, but maybe she could rebuild who she was. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Ava sat on her balcony again, watching the colors fade across the sky. Her mother joined her, handing her a cup of tea. "Karen came to see me today," Rebecca said gently. Ava looked surprised. "She did." Rebecca nodded. "She was sincere. I think she's finally beginning to understand." Ava smiled faintly. "Good," she said. "Everyone deserves the chance to grow." Below them, the city glowed with soft orange light, a quiet reminder that even after chaos, the world could find peace again. Ava leaned her head on her mother's shoulder as the last light faded, knowing that her story, painful as it was, had become something more, a lesson in grace under the brightest daylight of truth. The sunlight poured through the oval windows of Flight 782, painting soft golden lines across the cabin as it began its smooth descent into Los Angeles. The chaos that had once filled the air was gone now, replaced with a kind of thoughtful silence. Karen sat stiffly in her seat, her once arrogant posture now wilted under the heavy weight of her own actions. The hum of the engines seemed to echo her regret. Across the aisle, Ava looked out the window, her reflection serene but her thoughts deep. For most of the flight, Rebecca Turner, the CEO of Skylux Airlines and Ava's mother, sat beside her daughter, quietly holding her hand. No speeches, no explanations, just the simple warmth of understanding. To the other passengers, it was a powerful image, one that said more than words ever could. A mother, strong and proud, standing behind her daughter not because she was the CEO, but because she was her child. Karen's mind was spinning. Everything she'd built her self-worth on her appearance, her social image, her sense of superiority felt meaningless now. The way Rebecca had handled her earlier outburst replayed in her mind like a film she couldn't stop watching. That calm, unshakable authority, the unwavering love in her eyes when she looked at Abbott had pierced through Karen's pride like sunlight through fog. As the flight attendants prepared for landing, one of them approached Karen with a soft smile. "Ma'am," she said, "the captain wanted to thank all passengers for remaining calm earlier. He also asked me to make sure everyone feels safe and respected on this flight." Karen nodded wordlessly. It was a subtle reminder that she had disrupted that peace. Her throat tightened. For the first time, she wished she could take it all back, not because of the humiliation, but because she now saw the human cost of her cruelty. Meanwhile, Ava leaned her head against the seat, finally allowing herself to relax. "You didn't have to say anything, Mom," she whispered. Rebecca turned to her, her eyes softening. "I didn't say it as a CEO," she replied quietly. "I said it as your mother. The world needs to see people like you standing tall, and if that means stepping in, I'll always do it." Ava smiled faintly. "I think the world saw it already," she said, nodding toward a passenger to Rose, ahead, who was discreetly editing a video on their phone, the same one that had captured the confrontation. By the time Flight 782 touched down at LAX, the story had already begun to spread across social media. Headlines appeared within hours. "Passenger confronts trans woman, doesn't realize she's airline CEO's daughter." The world was talking, and not just about Karen's behavior but about dignity, equality, and the quiet power of grace under pressure. When the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers rose to gather their belongings. Rebecca stood up, helping Ava with her bag. Karen hesitated, then slowly approached them. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Miss Turner, Ava, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly." Ava looked up at her, studying her expression. There was no arrogance left, no sneer or superiority, just shame and sincerity. "Thank you," Ava said softly. "I accept your apology. Just try to see people for who they are next time, not what you expect them to be." Karen's eyes glistened. "I will," she said, before quietly making her way down the aisle. For the first time in a long while, she didn't rush to be first off the plane. She walked slowly, thinking about how fragile kindness could be and how easily she had broken it. As the other passengers exited, a few stopped to thank Ava and Rebecca for handling the situation with such dignity. One woman whispered, "You made my daughter feel seen today. She's trans too." Ava's eyes softened, and she nodded. Then this moment was worth it. Outside the terminal, bright daylight bathed everything in a golden glow. Reporters had already gathered, hoping for a statement. Cameras flashed as Rebecca and Ava stepped into view. But instead of anger or pride, they carried themselves with quiet composure. "Do you have any comment about what happened on board?" one journalist called out. Rebecca smiled faintly. "Only this," she said. "No one deserves to be disrespected for being who they are. Whether you sit in first class or economy, every passenger deserves the same dignity. The sky belongs to everyone." Ava looked at her mother, proud and grateful. The crowd erupted in soft applause, not for drama, but for truth. In that moment, the message soared higher than any airplane could. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ava scrolled through her phone. The video had millions of views. The comments were overwhelming, people thanking her for her calmness, others praising her mother for standing up. Amid the noise of the internet, there was something beautiful happening, a ripple of awareness, a reminder that decency still mattered. Rebecca entered the room, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You okay, sweetheart?" Ava smiled, tears in her eyes. "I think I am. It's just strange, something so hurtful turned into something bigger." "That's how light works," Rebecca said gently. "Even when people try to block it, it finds its way through." Ava leaned against her mother. "Do you think Karen learned anything?" Rebecca paused. "I hope so," she said. "But even if she didn't, others did, and maybe that's enough for today." The 2 women sat quietly, watching the sky change colors. Somewhere, far above the clouds, another Skylux plane crossed the horizon, its silver body glowing in the last rays of sun. For Ava, it wasn't just a plane anymore. It was a reminder that even when life throws shadows, there's always a way to rise above them. As night slowly fell, Ava closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "The sky belongs to everyone," and she believed it.